Hello again everyone, Will, Vincent and Paul Jenkins here for the second part of our look at the 2013 iRacing.com Indianapolis 500, a GlacierTV ICELounge special. Now, for those of you who joined us for part 1, you saw us take a look at some of the teams and drivers who we think will be making up the field of 33 for the 2013 iRacing Indianapolis 500, which will be live on PSR TV on the 25th of May 2013. For more information, go to iRacing.com about that. In this episode, however, we're going to talk about that mindset, that preparation, everything that you need to do as we head ourselves closer and closer to qualifying week and then, of course, the race. And Paul, when you think about Indianapolis, you're thinking about an Indianapolis 500, you're thinking about 3 hours plus sat behind a steering wheel, turning laps at speeds of over 230 miles an hour, inches apart from the other 32 cars on the racetrack, having to make split-second decisions, and you barely have time to breathe as you're covering the length of a football pitch in less than 1 second.
Well, they call it the greatest spectacle in racing for a reason. It really is. You were talking about extreme speeds, and you're talking about a track that requires precision over a 3-hour period, and any mistakes you make at any point, at any time in that whole period of time could end your race. And you know, if you think that sitting in front of your computer with a force feedback wheel in your hand for 3 hours isn't physically tolling, let me tell you something. It's not like driving a race car, but it's not like sitting there watching TV either.
And the fastest Indianapolis 500 that we have on record was the ISOWC Indianapolis 500 of 2012, which lasted a paltry 2 hours and 29 minutes. If you want to watch that race, of course, it is available on YouTube. Just head over to youtube.com and search for GlacierTV. In reality, however, Paul, we're talking about a race that will have anywhere between about 5 and 8 cautions. You're going to have to think not only about racing itself, but all those other bits as well. Are you saving tyres? Have you got enough fuel? Am I on the right strategy at this point in the race? Should I pit? Should I stay out? What's my track position like compared to my nearest rivals? There is so much that you have to think about while working either under caution or under green, that you've really got to get all of your numbers right before you hit the racetrack.
Well, absolutely. There's only so much thinking you can, so much strategy planning you can do before the race. As the Marine Corps says, make a plan, then make another plan, because the first one's going to break as soon as the first shot's fired. And I think you're going to see a lot of that here. We'll sit here and think about, okay, there's going to be five yellows. When are they going to occur? I don't know. At the beginning of the race, in the middle of the race. I mean, we do know, we have an idea how long the race is going to be. And you did mention that the ISOWC Indy 500. I remember that fondly because I think the last 130 laps of the race went caution free and my foot fell asleep. So it just mashing down on the gas pedal. But again, you're talking about, and I alluded to this in the first podcast, a professional race team at Indianapolis, you've got a crew, you've got a strategist, you've got a fuel guy, you've got the crew chief, you've got everybody working here. For, especially the independents, it's you. You're the crew chief. You're the strategist. You're making all of these decisions, and you've got to do it while you're trying to drive a race car around. So as much preparation as you can do is certainly important, but being able to make strategy decisions on the fly is even more vitally important. And in a race like this, if you make an error in strategy, it could be the end of you.
And let's turn our attention back to the here and now. I mean, we're currently in the 11th of May. And these guys have been practicing now for pretty much 2 weeks. Ever since the 2013 Season 2 build came out, these drivers have been thinking primarily about Indianapolis. It's a case every single year, and you could argue that, participation in the official series suffers because of it. But the reality is, there is no greater prize for an IndyCar sim racing driver than to win the iRacing Indianapolis 500. And if you start preparing now, you're already 2 weeks behind.
Well, absolutely. And again, the car did change with the last build. There have been some changes to the car, and you and I have both put hundreds and hundreds of laps in Indianapolis since this new build ourselves. And I can tell you that there's just it's not a huge change. It's not like you have to go back to the drawing board, but there's just enough where I mean, we've been as a team struggling trying to find the extra speed that we've lost, but you know, it's a struggle. What exactly changed? What upset the balance of the car? Everything is so knife edge here that any little tiny change, any tiny little upset, and you're back to chasing it around. So right now you've got teams that are frantically struggling to find what was lost and regain what was lost. And in the middle of this, let's not forget, and as I had alluded to, in the last build, there was discovered a slight problem with the tires, especially with the regular series at Charlotte. There were some tire failures, some anomalies with especially the right rear tire. Will these come into effect over the long run in Indianapolis? Will they not? We haven't seen it so far, but it doesn't mean it might not happen. Either way, what might happen is the tire engineers may change the compound again before the race, and we're all going to be struggling to find out what they did. So even as much preparation as you do, something can change, and everyone's going to be scrambling back to the drawing board again.
And that, of course, happened in 2010 and 2012, where changes were made to the car just weeks before the big race. And you could argue, you know, that in some ways there is no point in preparing until 10 days beforehand, because you're going to know at that point that all the regulations are set. But at the same time, this is the thing with Indy. It's not a one-dimensional process. Everything that you learn elsewhere comes back in some way, big or small, to your car and your setup at Indy.
Absolutely. I mean, the setup is so much here because, again, you're talking about a lot of cars that are going to be very, very close on speed. And any thousandth of a second you can make up per lap over the course of 200 laps makes a very, very big difference. So raw speed certainly helps. But I don't think that the fastest car on the track is necessarily going to win. It's all a matter of being able to keep touch with the front. Of course, there is the element of draft. There is the element of handling. And speed's important, but both of those are also very important because unless you're the leader, you are at some point going to find yourself having to contend with traffic. Well, even as the leader with lap cars, everyone's going to have to contend with traffic at some point. And it's going to be a matter of how your car handles in those situations that also are going to make a big difference.
And so far, we've only really talked about setup. We'll stay with setups for the time being. And you do make a very clear distinction there between running your car up front and also running your car in not just 1-2 car dirty air, but a pack of 9-10 cars dirty air. And there is a substantial difference, and the drivers are going to not only have to work about their setup, but also think about in-car changes, you know, tire pressures, wings, but also, you know, the things they control right there in the cockpit, the front and rear anti-roll bars, to make that car a little bit looser, grip a little bit better in the corners, and also that weight jacker as well. And, you know, it's all part of that preparation and designing a setup that has as much adjustability as possible. For a track like Indy, it can really be a godsend.
Well, it can make the difference in the long run, whether or not you're a winner or a mid-packer. You know, you had mentioned the in-car adjustments, the roll bars, and the weight jacker, all very, very important tools and will be used extensively by everybody in the race because, you know, depending on where you are on the track, where you are on the fuel run, and who you're around, the car will change, and you have to be able to adjust to those. But again, these cars are so knife edge. If you make the wrong adjustment, at worst you're going to slow, or at best you're going to slow down, and at worst you're going to find yourself spinning. So these guys, you know, a lot of this is going to be, and a lot of the practice time is going to be spent, hopefully, if these guys are smart, you're going to spend a lot of time around each other, around traffic, making adjustments. Does this work? No, that doesn't work. We're going to have to go back. But one of the other things you did mention, and I think something that separates the top teams from the middle teams, is your ability to understand what's happening around the car and make in pit adjustments, wing adjustments, and tire adjustments, considering where you are in the race. And we don't really talk a lot about that because a lot of teams work so hard on the setup, they think they've got it set. But in the dynamic environment that is a 200-mile race, you've got to think about, all right, I need a little bit more here, I need a little bit less here. What can I do to the car to get that? And that, I think, is an important thing to understand going forward.
And Indianapolis is so technical that just one change, for example, a click of wing or a half-pound drop in the right rear tyre, for example, can make a huge difference. And especially if it comes down to the last 10-15 laps and drivers come onto pit road to top up with gas, I think the driver who can make that wing change or make a change to their tyre pressures to make sure that car works on what would essentially be half a tank of gas on a flat-out sprint, I think they could be the ones that go to victory road.
But you have to understand what you're doing to the car, because you could just as easily lose the race making an adjustment. And that's really what's going to separate the wheat from the chaff here, is understanding, okay, if I have this little gas in the car, how much is it going to change my ride height? How much is it going to change the grip level front to back? What is it going to do to the balance if I add a click of rear wing, or if I add a click of front wing, or if I take a half pound out of the left rear? What is that going to do to my car? And when you get down to it, these are the things that these guys need to be out there practicing. Because once you get to a point where the car is fast, finding a thousandth of a second isn't going to make a difference if you don't understand what changes happen to the car as the fuel burns off and the rear end comes up a little bit, and the aerodynamics change. Every ounce of gas you take out of the car changes the balance of the car. How do you regain that? These are the things that you have to understand in order to truly be a champion here in the IndyCar.
And to turn our attention just from pure setups to drivers, Monica Clara Brown in 2011 famously did close to 20,000 laps practicing for the 2011 iRacing Indianapolis 500. And whilst many drivers won't be putting in that much testing, you still need to put in a ton of laps, not to understand your setup, but to just understand the track, because it is unique to any other track that the IndyCar Series goes to.
You'll hear some people refer to Indianapolis as a 4-turn road course, and it really kind of is. You know, when you think about the track, we talk about the track for a little bit. You look at, somebody draws the Indianapolis 500 or the Indianapolis Motor Speedway as just a line, and it looks precisely the same. Every corner the same, every straightaway, the short chutes the same, the back straight, the front straight the same. When in reality, every single inch of that track is different. Every turn is different. Every aspect of this track is different. Consider this track in space. When you're going down the front stretch, you're going downhill. You're going to go faster into turn 1 than you will going into turn 3, even though they are precisely the same dimension and arc and everything of the track. Your view of turn 1 is radically different than your view of turn 3. You've got grandstands on both sides. You've got the pit wall on the inside. Suddenly, I mean, you get to the point where the time you get to see the apex of the turn to the time where you turn into the apex of the turn is minuscule. You cannot determine how you're going to turn. You can't see the turn before you've got to turn into it. And this is really the big thing. You hear a lot of talk about turn 1 at Indy. Turn 1 at Indy. It's the killer. You know, and people who don't understand, who haven't driven the track, don't understand. Well, it's just like every other turn. Oh, it's not. You're going in there faster. You're going in there downhill. The aspect of the track changes. Your view of the track changes. Every single turn of this track is unique.
And the one thing that always gets me, everyone always talks about turn number 1. Yes, you know, you've got these grandstands. Yes, that turning point is so important. You know, the corner that most people mess up on is actually turn 2, because of the fact that you come out of turn number 1 and in getting into turn 2, for some reason, so many people just can't hit their apex at that corner. And in qualifying, at least, more runs get lost in turn 2 than they do in turn 1.
They do, and personally, I have the same problem. Personally, my problem is it's very hard to judge the apex of turn two because unlike the other turns, the track it's hard to describe except to say that the inside opens up, and you can pretty much see all the way around that corner from the time you exit turn one. So a lot of drivers turn into that turn late because it's so open that you think you have your turn in set, and you go to hit the apex and you're wide. If you go in early, there is a very, very nasty bump that you hit, and it'll not so much throw you off the track, but it will slow you down because the tires will kind of skitter out. And again, when you're talking about inches and millimeters, it makes a big difference, and it just sort of it messes up the trajectory through the corner. So you have a very good point. Turn two, most people, it's where you're going to lose the most speed. Most people aren't crashing out of turn two, but a lot of people are losing a lot of speed out of turn two. And some of it's psychological, obviously. The turn, again, now you're going to make that turn, you're going to go uphill. So another thing that happens is when you turn into that apex, the car initially starts to push, but as you come up, it starts to get a little bit looser.
And turn 3 and 4, in my opinion, they're always the two easiest corners on the racetrack. However, you're going to get a lot of passing, I think, this year, Paul, done in turn 3, because everyone's so scared of 1 that we just talked about turn 2. Someone gets a bad run out of 2, it's very easy to just slip down the inside of them on that back straightaway, and then try and make that move into arguably a safer turn 3, try and complete that pass coming out of 4.
You might think it's safer, but it really isn't. It is actually, you're going slower into turn 3. Turn 3 and turn 4, I would say, are the easiest to get wrong when you're side by side, because you think you've got the grip to go side by side through there until you're on the outside and you run out of track. But the thing about it is, going through the backstretch, you don't get as much of a run on people as you would getting a run on turn 1. And that's why you see a lot of attempts into turn 1. You come out of turn 4, you can really get a run on somebody and get beside them through the front stretch. So turn 3 being the easier place to make passes, indeed, but I think that if you want to win the Indianapolis 500, you have got to figure out how to make a turn stick out of turn 1.
And let's take away everything about setups for a moment. How do you start preparing for an Indy 500?
Well, there's two prongs to it. Mentally, you've got to be prepared for it. It's a long time to sit in the seat and keep your concentration level up. You've got a lot to think about. You've got a lot of strategy you've got to think about. The more you can sort out beforehand, the better it is. But just, and this is where experience behind the wheel pays, especially experience behind the wheel driving long races. I like to look at series like the ISOWC, which does nearly full-length races. Once you've done a few of those, you start to sort out the mental preparation involved in making it through that kind of race, and picking and choosing the spots to kind of take a mental nap, and when you can't. Physically, you're sitting in a seat for 3 hours at least, staring at a screen, holding onto a force feedback wheel. To say that it's not physically tolling would be that's not correct. It is very extreme. It's very taxing on the body, even though you're not like an IndyCar racer. You're not dealing with the G-forces or the heat or the dehydration or the 200 beats per second or 200 beats per minute heart rate that a real IndyCar driver does. You do have the adrenaline rush. You do have the gripping the wheel. You do have your right foot falling asleep trying to mash that flat pedal another inch into the floor.
And as far as the top split goes as well, I mean, it's 500 miles. You are racing inches away from other drivers. Does the fact that you're going to be, streamed to thousands of people on PSR TV, does that come into play?
I suppose it depends on who you are. I've raced and broadcasted events before, and when you get down to it, you'll think about it at the start, you'll think about it during the pace laps, but when it comes down to actual racing, there's so much more going on in your mind. You kind of forget about the crowd. You kind of forget about the cameras, the commentators. All you're thinking about is, just racing your race. And, the hardest parts for me, especially when I first started out in my first broadcast event, was the yellow flags, when you stop and think, oh boy, did I just make a fool out of myself.
Indeed. And, the fact, thousands of people will be watching the fourth running of the iRacing.com Indianapolis 500. Just to remind everyone watching as well that the broadcast for the 2013 iRacing Indianapolis 500 will be on Saturday, the 25th of May 2013. Start time for that will be 2 p.m. Eastern. And of course that will be live on iRacing Live and PSR TV as well. But to turn our attention back to Indy, we've talked about, setting that car up. We've talked about that mental and that physical preparation. One other thing we haven't talked about yet is what happens when you're doing these test laps and things just aren't working out for you. And you can see your competitors are going faster. And I think that whole word we're looking for here is motivation.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it is. It's just you work so hard on something, and all right, we found ourselves a half a tenth, and you get into the practice session, strap the car on, everyone takes it to the track, and you're buzzing around, you're doing great, you're hitting your points, you get into the pits, and they tell you, yeah, you're sixth fastest, and oh man, I tell you what, your heart just sinks. Like, what am I doing wrong? And yeah, it does. The frustration factor, especially when you're talking about preparation, it really is what separates the men from the boys in this, is being able to take that defeat and turning it into, all right, what else can I do? What am I doing wrong? What am I doing right? And a lot of drivers, you think about this, and this is where maturity level comes in, is you go out there, you get bested. And a lot of drivers start thinking about the negative. I did this wrong. What did I do wrong? How can I be so slow? Where the mature race car driver sits down and goes, what can I do to improve what I've got? What did I do right? And I think that when you get into the waning days of preparation, of practice, of the mock qualifying runs, you're going to find that the people that are going to get faster are the people that are going to stop and think about, all right, am I getting slowed down because I'm getting frustrated, or am I getting slowed down because I don't have what I need? And I think that's what you're going to see going forward toward when it gets a little closer to showtime.
And one of those key things as well is going to be pressure, and I think that'll be the difference, especially when you're looking at those last 3 or 4 rows of cars who make the top split. The idea of pressure and the fact that you have got to perform over essentially 5 laps, that outlap, and then 4 flying laps. And as far as that qualifying run goes, that starts the second you release that pit limiter, go over that bump, and hold down on that inside line to get onto the racetrack. You have to kind of get onto the blend point at about 217 miles an hour just to have any shot of doing a reasonable lap on that first lap. But, you're thinking about this. You've got a week of qualifying. We all know it's going to come down like it's done the last 2 years, those last 6 hours. And you and I have both been there. There really isn't a more pressurized environment in all of sim racing.
Well, absolutely. And you had mentioned something. Let me go back and mention something you had mentioned about a unique feature of the 4-lap qualifying that iRacing does for this event is there is no there's no outlap, or there's no warm-up lap, if you will. Your lap starts the first time you cross that start-finish line. So, as you had alluded, you have got to be fast right out of the gate, which is not easy to do when you're talking about a car that is set up for banked corners, and you are now trying to go fast on a flat, narrow corner, and one that features a pretty substantial bump right as you get onto that warm-up lane coming out of the pits. And I mean, you hit that wrong and your run's over before it even starts. So very, very careful to hit that fast enough so that you don't lose any traction, you don't lose any time, but slow enough that you don't go spinning out of control and just crash. Again, though, the you talk about pressure. I remember vividly the 2012 ISOWC Indy 500 where we did a traditional qualifier weekend, and with the 3 tries and everything. And I remember very, very vividly, I was not part of a big team back then, and I was struggling to find speed. And I just remember trying and trying and trying to make the show, and just trying to find that speed, and the clock is ticking down and you're getting more and more desperate. And that is just, there is nothing like it ever in motorsports anywhere. It is so unique to the Indianapolis 500, the real race, and to the iRacing Indianapolis 500, even though it's a bit different here, but there is simply nothing like it.
And as far as preparation goes for these drivers, I mean, you talk about qualifying. Do you put that banker lap in at the start of the week and then try and improve that? Or do you just try and get it out of the way as quickly as you can?
I think you're going to find different strategies by different people. Some guys who just want to get it done with and start working on their race setup. Some guys are going to be struggling. They're going to wait to see what those first laps are, get back with engineering and figure out, all right, well, we don't have that, or we do have that, or we can improve on that. And we'll go off into a corner and do some testing and maybe show up a little bit later and try to put in that fast lap towards the end. And then you're going to have teams that know they're fast, the Young O's and the Tim Doyles, who might not want to show their hand until the very last moment so that they can't get bested. So it really depends on where you are in speed and what you're trying to accomplish. If you're not terribly quick, you might just want to get it over with, get it solidly in the field, start working on that race setup and getting ready for the weekend. If you are quick, you might just wait, start working on race setup and then come back to the qualifier towards the end of it, put in that fast lap and hope nobody snookers you at the end.
And I tell you what, if you want to understand just how stressful an environment it can be, go and find one of these teams and ask to sit in their TeamSpeak channel about 2 hours before the end of qualifying, and you'll hear pure stress and emotions from these drivers. Dom Duhan, we had a chat with him last week. If you're listening, this is the one time of the year where you should feel my pain as a team owner rather than the other way around. I'll tell you that one. But to sum up this section, Paul, we've talked about, preparation. We've talked about, your driver preparation, dealing with pressure, mental, physical preparation, putting it all together so that when you do 500 miles on the racetrack, you've got everything that you need mentally and physically to get the job done. We've also talked about, setups and how important it is to fine-tune that over the month of May, not only in qualifying but also race as well. And so often, so many other teams will be focusing their attention on just getting into the field that arguably their race setup will suffer. We have, of course, got pretty much a week's worth of racing before the big race itself, with arguably sprint races, 70-lap races around IMS in the iRacing.com official series. And that is going to be a very good proving ground, I think, for the week, because you've not got all of the hiding of the 4-lap qualifying to go on. It's all going to be about race pace, and a lot of drivers are going to want to see what their competition is doing in a race environment.
Yeah, this is going to be very unique in terms of gathering intel. It's going to be very interesting to see as that time goes on who is not going to take to the track, and we, as the week goes on, we'll keep an eye on that, and if we see any interesting goings on, we'll certainly report on it. But I have a feeling we're going to see some guys who aren't going to take to the track. They don't want to show what they've got, and I think you're going to find a lot of drivers that want to get into the show are going to put a lot of time into these races, if for no other reason as a proving ground to see what their race setup looks like in traffic, under pressure, going into the pits. And that's something we didn't really talk about. the races many times are won or lost in the pits. That is a very important part of strategy. Not so much when you're going to pit and how much fuel you're going to take and what adjustments you're going to make, just getting into the pits. Cranking that car down from 225 miles an hour down to 55 miles an hour without losing any time, without losing control of the car. Can you do that? Can you do that in the presence of other cars who are doing the same thing? If you talk about a long green flag run, you're going to talk about a lot of cars that are going to be within this very small window. You will have company going into the pit lane. You have to be able to be in control, to be able to adjust to a changing environment while you're trying to slam that car down from, take 180 miles an hour off the car in the space of essentially several hundred feet. Brakes in these cars very, very good, obviously, but and everybody's setup's going to be a little bit different. So you got to look at things like that too.
And I tell you what, if you are someone looking to get into the top split of the 2013 iRacing.com Indianapolis 500, and you've done everything else, make sure you know how to get on and off a pit road. It is much more important than anyone gives it credit for. And you look at drivers like Sean Stroud, John Paquin, Tim Doyle, Young O, the big names who have won and done very well at Indianapolis. That is what separates them from the crowd after 500 miles of racing. This is all we've got time for in this episode. Next time, we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at what qualifying is going to be like for 2013, as well as a little bit of a sneak preview towards the race as well. I've been Vincent, that's been Paul Jenkins, and we'll see you all next time. Bye bye!